Chapter 1. The door. The first thing I remember is the sound of her heels on marble. Not loud. Not theatrical. Just steady. The kind of sound that belongs in that building, in that lobby, in that world. Except nobody in that lobby knew that yet. It was the 14th of December. A Thursday. The kind of cold that makes Manhattan feel like it's trying to push you back inside. Harper & Associates hosted their annual holiday party on the 34th floor of the Whitmore Building, floor-to-ceiling glass, catered by a Michelin-starred kitchen, attended by a very specific kind of person. Partners. Senior clients. People who had spent decades constructing the precise social architecture of a room like that. And then there was Emma. She wasn't on the official guest list. She was there as my plus one, my wife of 9 years, standing beside me in a deep navy dress, her dark hair pulled back, a glass of water already in her hand because she never drank at professional events. The receptionist, young, polished, clearly trained to identify who mattered, looked at Emma, looked at her tablet, and smiled the kind of smile that isn't really a smile. "I'm sorry, I just need to confirm the guest listing. Could you wait just a moment? Right here." She pointed. Slightly to the side. Away from the entrance flow. Emma looked at the spot. Looked back at the receptionist. And nodded once. "Of course," she said. She waited for 40 seconds. I counted. Then we were waved through. Not with an apology, not with acknowledgement. Just a brief wave, like clearing a minor obstruction. Inside it got worse. 3 of the senior partners' wives formed their own gravitational cluster near the east window. The spot with the best view of the city, the best champagne, and the clearest signal of where the real social hierarchy sat that evening. When I introduced Emma, one of them, I later learned her name was Catherine Albright, wife of the managing partner, looked at Emma the way people look at a menu item they've already decided not to order. "Oh, how sweet," Catherine said. "And what do you do?" Emma smiled. "A little of everything," she said. Catherine turned back to her group. That was it. That was the entire exchange. What Catherine Albright did not know, what none of them knew, was that 6 months before that party, Emma had been in a room in Zurich, talking a man down from the edge of a decision that would have collapsed a $200 million acquisition deal and ended 3 careers. She had done it in 40 minutes. With no notes. In a language that was not her first. But that night, in that lobby, she waited by the door. And nobody in that room had any idea what was about to happen. Chapter 2. Who Emma actually was. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 41 years old. I've spent the last 14 years in logistics consulting, supply chain restructuring mostly. I'm good at my job. I'm organized. I think in systems. Emma is different. Emma thinks in people. We met in 2015 at a conference in Chicago. One of those mid-tier professional events where the name tags are slightly too large and the hotel coffee is slightly too cold. She was a panelist. I was in the audience. She said something during a Q&A that made me put my pen down and just listen. Something about the way people telegraph their breaking point before they consciously know they've reached it. I asked her about it afterward. We talked for 3 hours. By the time I understood what she actually did for a living, I was already in love with her. Emma was a crisis negotiator. Not the kind you see in movies, not the flak jacket bullhorn SWAT team kind. The quiet kind. The kind that corporations, governments, and international bodies called when something was about to go catastrophically wrong and the usual channels had already failed. Mergers on the verge of violent collapse. Executive kidnappings. Whistleblower containment situations. Board-level mutinies. Family wealth disputes that had crossed into criminal territory. She had handled 47 formal engagements in 12 years. 43 successful resolutions. She had testified before 2 Senate subcommittees. She had consulted for a foreign ministry I am not allowed to name. She held 2 certifications that less than 300 people in the world possessed. And she almost never talked about any of it. This is the part people find hardest to understand. They assume that someone with Emma's background would walk into every room like a statement. She didn't. She had spent 12 years in rooms where the moment people knew what she was, the dynamic shifted in ways that made her job harder. So she had trained herself. deliberately, methodically, to enter as a question mark. The most powerful position in any room, she told me once, is the one nobody has assigned a value to yet. I understood it intellectually. What I hadn't fully understood, and this is the part one I'm not proud of, is that over the years, I had started to accept other people's misreading of her. Not maliciously, not consciously, but I had stopped correcting people when they dismissed her. I had stopped inserting her full title into introductions. I had let her become, in the shorthand of our social world, simply Daniel's wife. I don't fully know when it happened. Somewhere between the third firm dinner and the seventh charity event where she was seated at the wrong table, I had stopped fighting it. She had noticed. She had never said it directly, but she had noticed. The night of the Harper and Associates party, I introduced her as my +1. Not as Emma Reeves. Not as a crisis negotiation specialist with 12 years of field experience. As my +1. She didn't flinch. She didn't correct me. She just stood there with her glass of water and her slight smile and let the room assign her whatever value it wanted. She had done this before. She knew exactly how it ended. Chapter 3. The pattern. The Harper party wasn't the first time. It wasn't even close to the first time. There was the Morrison Group dinner in 2019, a client event at a private club in Midtown where the seating arrangements were designed, apparently without irony, to separate the professionals from the spouses. Emma had closed a $4.1 million consulting contract that morning. She sat at the spouses' table and listened to a 40-minute conversation about Hampton's rental prices. She didn't say a word about the contract. I didn't say a word either. There was the Whitfield Conference in 2021, a 2-day leadership summit in Boston where Emma had been invited as a guest speaker. A genuine invitation. Her name was on the program, but when we arrived at registration, the volunteer, a well-meaning graduate student, looked at both of us, looked at the badge printer, and handed the speaker badge to me. I handed it back. Emma said nothing. We moved on. But I remember her face in that moment. Not wounded, not angry. Just noting it. Filing it. The way she filed everything. There was my own firm's Christmas party in 2022. The year her name was left off the program entirely, even though she had been specifically asked to attend by my managing director, who had met her at a previous event and wanted her perspective on a difficult client situation. When we arrived, the event coordinator checked her clipboard and said with genuine apology, "I'm so sorry, I only have Daniel listed." Emma smiled. "That's fine. I'll just follow him around." The managing director found her an hour later. They spoke for 45 minutes. He sent her a formal consulting inquiry the following week. She billed him $18,000 for a 2-day engagement. The event coordinator who hadn't listed her name never knew any of it happened. But the pattern wasn't just professional events. It was deeper than that. It was the way conversations at dinner parties would naturally drift toward me, toward my work, my opinions, my assessments, while Emma sat beside me, occasionally asked surface questions, occasionally offering a line or two, mostly listening. People assumed she was quiet because she had nothing to say. She was quiet because she was watching. Every room she entered, she was reading the power dynamics, the insecurities, the alliances, the pressure points. She told me once that she could walk into a dinner party of 12 people and within 20 minutes tell me which 2 people were lying, which one was about to make a bad decision, and which one was holding the room together without anyone realizing it. I believed her completely. But I also, and again this is the part that sits uncomfortably with me now, had started to use her ability as a kind of private resource. After events in the car, I would ask her what she thought. She would give me detailed, precise assessments. I would nod and think about how to use them. I never once, in those car ride debrief conversations, suggested we go back inside and let her say those things out loud. I kept her insight like a private advisor. I presented it like personal intuition. She let me. I think she was waiting to see how long it would take me to understand what I was doing. It took me until the 14th of December, on the 34th floor of the Whitmore building, watching my wife stand slightly to the side of a door at a party where she outqualified every single person in the room. The partners' wives had moved on from their east window cluster by 8:15. The formal program was scheduled for 8:30. A keynote from a moderately well-known business author who had published a book on organizational resilience earlier that year. I had seen his name on the invitation. His talk was supposed to run 30 minutes. At 8:22, the managing partner, a tall, silver-haired man named Gerald Albright, appeared at the edge of the room with his phone pressed to his ear and an expression I recognized immediately from crisis situations. Something had gone wrong. I watched him hang up, speak quietly to two people, run one hand across the back of his neck. The keynote speaker had canceled. Flight delay. Unrecoverable. The room didn't know yet, but Albright did. And in approximately 8 minutes, 300 people who had paid attention to the program schedule were going to notice the absence of a centerpiece. Emma was watching Albright from across the room. I know that look. I have seen it exactly twice in 9 years. She had already assessed the situation. She was already deciding. Chapter 4. The keynote cancels. Gerald Albright was not a man who panicked visibly. In 23 years of running Harper & Associates, he had managed hostile takeovers, client defections, and one very public SEC inquiry that had lasted 14 months. He was known, in the particular vocabulary of his world, as unflappable. He was flapping. I watched him cross the room toward his events coordinator, a young woman named Priya who was already holding a tablet and whispering urgently into a Bluetooth earpiece. I was close enough to catch fragments. Confirmed cancellation, weather at O'Hare. No backup on the program. Priya's face did not change. She was a professional. But her left hand holding the tablet had tightened. The room was still circulating. Champagne. Past appetizers. The low orchestral hum of a string quartet near the far wall. Nobody knew yet. But the 8:30 program start was now 7 minutes away, the podium was empty, and Gerald Albright was doing the quiet, controlled calculation of a man realizing that the most prestigious client event of his year was about to have a 30-minute hole in its center. Emma set down her water glass. She had been standing approximately 12 feet from me, near the second window column, in a cluster of peripheral guests. The plus ones, the quieter spouses, the people whose name tags didn't carry firm affiliations. She had been there for 40 minutes. I am embarrassed to say, mostly left her there. She walked toward Albright. Not quickly. Not with any visible urgency. She walked the way she walked into every difficult room. Like she had already been there and was simply returning. I moved closer. Not because she asked me to. Because something in her posture told me I should pay attention. She reached Albright just as he finished a second call. He looked at her with the polite blankness of a man who did not immediately place her face. "I'm Emma Reeves," she said. "Daniel Reeves' wife. I know what happened with your speaker." Albright's expression tightened slightly. "It's being managed." "I know," Emma said. "I'm offering to cover it." A pause. The kind of pause where a person is deciding whether to be dismissive or curious. Albright was intelligent enough to choose curious. Cover it how? As a speaker. Give me the topic from his program and 15 minutes to stand at that podium. The topic was organizational resilience under pressure. Emma's expression did not change. "That's what I do for a living," she said. "Give me the room." Albright stared at her for exactly 3 seconds. I counted. "You're serious?" She was already turning toward the podium. Albright looked at me. I don't know what he was looking for, confirmation, reassurance, a reason to say no. I looked back at him and said the truest thing I knew. "Let her speak." Priya was at the microphone at 8:31, 1 minute late, which in Harper & Associates terms was essentially a crisis, and introduced an unscheduled addition to the evening's program, with the careful neutrality of someone who had been handed a name on a notepad 30 seconds earlier. "Please welcome Emma Reeves." There was polite, distracted applause. The room was still mid-conversation. Glasses were still moving. At least 4 people did not look up. Emma walked to the podium. She adjusted the microphone once, down, not up, because she was going to speak at a conversational level, not a broadcast level. and looked out at the room with the calm of someone who had stood in front of far more dangerous audiences than this one. She did not say good evening. She did not thank anyone for having her. She said, "The most expensive mistake any organization makes is misidentifying where the pressure is actually coming from." The room went quiet, not all at once. In a wave, starting from the front tables and rolling backward. The way silence moves when something true has just been said. She had them in 14 seconds. I know because I looked at my watch. Chapter 5. 22 minutes. I have heard Emma speak in formal settings exactly 4 times in our marriage. Each time, I have walked away feeling like I had underestimated her. Each time I have told myself I would not make that mistake again. I kept making it. That night was different. That night, I didn't walk away feeling like I had underestimated her. I walked away feeling like I had finally fully understood the scale of what I had been casually overlooking for 9 years. She spoke without notes. This sounds like a minor detail. It is not a minor detail. The speaker she had replaced, a credentialed, published, professionally coached keynote speaker, had sent a 34-slide deck to Priya 3 weeks in advance. He had prep materials. He had a run-of-show document. He had talking points laminated on an index card that was still, presumably, somewhere in his laptop bag in a delayed aircraft at O'Hare. Emma had her mind, her 12 years, and the 30 seconds she had taken at the podium to look at the room and decide what it needed to hear. She opened with the line about pressure, the misidentification of where it comes from. Then she moved, without transition or throat clearing, into a framework she called the 3 silences. The first silence, she said, was the silence before the crisis. The moment when every signal is present and nobody is reading them because the room has decided everything is fine. She described it with such precision, the specific texture of that silence, the way it sits in an organization's communication patterns, the exact vocabulary people use when they are about to make a catastrophic collective mistake, that I watched 3 senior partners exchange glances that said this is exactly what happened to us last year. The second silence was the silence during the crisis. The shutdown of honest communication. The performance of competence in the absence of it. She described a situation, anonymized, clinical, precise, involving a mid-sized firm facing an internal ethics breach, and the exact sequence of communication failures that turned a manageable situation into a reputational collapse. She named no names. She named no firms. She didn't need to. The situation was specific enough that half the room recognized the pattern from their own experience. 2 people stopped checking their phones during this section. I noticed because I was watching the room, not just Emma. The third silence was the silence after. And this was the part of her talk that did something I had not expected. It got quiet. Not audience quiet. Room quiet. The kind of quiet where people stop performing attentiveness and start actually listening. The third silence, Emma said, was the one that came after a crisis resolved. The silence where organizations had the chance to change their patterns but almost never did. Because the pressure was gone. Because the memory of the pain faded faster than the structural problem that caused it. Because rooms, like people, had a remarkable capacity to return to comfortable arrangements even when those arrangements had already proven dangerous. She paused for exactly 4 seconds after that line. Then she said, "The organizations that survive over generations are not the ones that handle crises best. They are the ones that have learned to be honest during the first silence. Before the pressure arrives. When honesty is still optional." She let that sit. Then she said, "Thank you," stepped back from the podium, and walked toward the edge of the stage. The room came apart. Not in the way a concert comes apart, not immediately, not explosively. In the way a room comes apart when it has heard something it did not expect and needs a moment to process the fact that it is now different from what it was 22 minutes ago. The applause started at the front left table. It moved. By the time it was full, it was the kind of applause that people give when they are not thinking about applauding, when the gesture is involuntary. Gerald Albright was on his feet. Catherine Albright, who had not made eye contact with Emma during introductions, was clapping with her hands above her chest, the way people clap when they have momentarily forgotten where they are. 3 senior partners moved toward the podium before Emma had fully stepped away. I watched one of them, a woman I recognized as the head of Harper's restructuring division, hand Emma a business card and say something that made Emma nod once and reach into her clutch for her own card. Then a second partner. Then a third. I was standing 12 feet away. I had introduced this woman as my +1. I had let her stand by the door. I stood there with my champagne glass, full untouched, warming in my hand, and felt the specific clarifying weight of a man who has just watched someone he loves show the world exactly who she is. It was the proudest moment of my life. It was also the most ashamed I have ever felt. Chapter 6. The contracts. The 2 conversations at the podium lasted a combined 14 minutes. I know because I didn't move. I stood in my spot with my warm champagne and watched my wife conduct 2 separate, simultaneous professional negotiations with the quiet efficiency of someone who does this in her sleep. She was not performing. She was not excited. She was working. The first conversation was with Margaret Chen, head of organizational restructuring at Harper & Associates, 15 years at the firm, the kind of woman who did not hand out her business card unless she intended to use it. She had identified from Emma's talk a specific situation her division was facing. A mid-level client in financial services that had survived a significant internal scandal and was now in the exact third silence pattern Emma had described. Paralyzed. Comfortable. Heading back into the same structural failure. She wanted Emma's firm to come in for an assessment. Emma asked 2 questions. Listened completely. Named a number. Margaret didn't negotiate. She said, "When can you start?" The second conversation was with a man named Thomas Hirsch, not a Harper partner, but a senior client, founder of a mid-sized private equity group that had been having what he described as communication problems at the leadership level. He had been in the audience when Emma spoke. He had, by his own account, written down 6 separate lines from her talk in the margin of his program. He was not asking for a consultation. He was asking for a retainer. Emma listened to the scope, asked 4 questions: budget cycle, team size, how long the problem had been active, and whether the leadership team knew they were the problem. That last question made Hirsch laugh once sharply and say, "Absolutely not." Emma nodded. Named a retainer figure. Hirsch said, "I'll have legal contact you Monday." By the time the evening formally ended, the string quartet packing up, the catering staff clearing the last of the past appetizers, Emma had 2 formal engagements in process and 3 more business cards from people who had approached her after the podium conversations ended. Gerald Albright found us near the elevator at 10:47. He looked at Emma with the expression of a man who had spent the last 2 hours recalibrating something. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for the way the evening began." Emma looked at him steadily. "You don't," she said, "but I appreciate you saying it." He handed her his card. "I'd like to talk about whether there's a formal relationship that makes sense between your firm and ours." Emma took the card, looked at it once, put it in her clutch. "Have your office call mine," she said. In the car afterward, the same car where I had spent years asking Emma what she thought so I could use her assessments as my own, I didn't ask her anything for a long time. We were 12 blocks from the Whitmore building before I spoke. "I'm sorry," I said. She looked at me. "For what specifically?" That was the Emma of it. Not accepting a vague apology. Asking me to be precise. "For introducing you as my +1. For not correcting people tonight. For the Morrison dinner. For the Whitfield conference. For the last several years of letting people assign you a value and not saying anything." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you know why I never asked you to correct them?" she said. I shook my head. "Because I needed to know if the room would show me what it was on its own. The rooms always do eventually." She paused. "I was waiting to see if you would too." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. She looked out the window for a moment. Then, "You did. Tonight. You said, 'Let her speak.' That was enough. It was the most generous thing anyone has ever said to me." The Margaret Chin engagement officially began 6 weeks later. a 12-week organizational communication assessment that Emma's firm billed at $94,000. The Hirsch retainer was signed the following Thursday. The Gerald Albright conversation evolved into a formal advisory relationship that, as of this recording, is in its second year. Catherine Albright, who had turned away during introductions, sent Emma a handwritten note 2 weeks after the party. It said, "I've been thinking about the third silence since that evening. I'd love to have lunch." Emma replied, "They had lunch." I asked Emma what they talked about. She smiled slightly and said, "The first silence, Chapter 7. What she taught me. I've told this story a few times now, to close friends, once to a small group of colleagues at a firm dinner, the kind of dinner where Emma was for once properly introduced before we sat down. Every time I tell it, people ask the same question. They ask, "How did she stay so calm?" And I always give the same answer, because it's the only honest one I have. She wasn't calm because nothing bothered her. She was calm because she had decided a long time ago that no room was worth the cost of losing herself inside it. Emma had been dismissed in professional settings for most of her career. Not because she was unqualified, she was, by any objective measure, among the most qualified people in most rooms she entered. But because she didn't look like the default image people carried of someone who should be taken seriously. She was a woman. She was often the youngest in the room. She spoke quietly. She didn't fill silence with performance. And for years those things had worked against her in the first impression. What people never understood was that she had built her entire professional method on exactly that misreading. Every room that dismissed her became a room she could read with perfect clarity. Because no one was performing for her. No one was managing her perception. No one was being careful. They showed her everything unguarded because they didn't think she was watching. She was always watching. The crisis negotiation training had formalized what she already intuitively knew. The most dangerous thing you can do in a high-stakes environment is let someone believe you don't matter. Because people who believe they're unobserved are honest. And honest rooms are the only rooms where real decisions get made. She had spent 12 years using other people's underestimation as a professional instrument. What the Harper party gave her, what I gave her finally when I said let her speak, was the room's permission to stop being invisible. She didn't need that permission to know her own value. She had known it for years. But there is something different about being witnessed. About having the room you've been reading finally read you back. And seeing in their faces the moment of recognition. That meant something. Even to her. She told me so quietly about 3 weeks after the party. Not with drama. Just a simple statement in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, coffee in hand. That night helped, she said. Not because I needed them to see it, but because you finally saw it. Out loud. I've thought about that line every day since. If there is something this story is actually about, underneath the party, the podium, the contracts, the standing ovation, it is about the cost of allowing the people you love to be invisible in rooms that don't deserve their silence. It is about what happens when you stop filing other people's misreading as a fact about them, and start asking what it says about you. Emma did not need that room to validate her. She needed her husband to stop acting like the room's opinion was the same as the truth. I got there. 12 blocks from the Whitmore building, on the 14th of December. It was late. It was not too late. If you are watching this and you are the Emma in your own story, the one standing slightly to the side of the door, quietly noting everything, waiting to be given the room, I want you to hear this. You don't need the room's permission, but you deserve to be introduced correctly. And if the person beside you hasn't done that yet, they still can. It is not too late. If you made it to the end of this story, I want you to stay with me for just 60 more seconds, because what I'm about to say matters more than the story itself. Emma's value did not begin the night she walked to that podium. It did not begin when 3 partners handed her their business cards, or when Gerald Albright apologized at the elevator, or when the contracts were signed. Her value existed on the morning she walked into the Whitmore building and was asked to wait by the door. It existed the year before that. And the year before that. The room's failure to see it was never a fact about Emma. It was a fact about the room. If this story found you, If something in it landed in a place you recognize, I'd like to know where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments. Just that. Your city. You'd be surprised how many people in the same room are watching this from very different places, carrying very similar weight. And if there is someone in your life who is standing slightly to the side of a door right now, someone the room has quietly decided doesn't matter, consider this your reminder that the most powerful person in any room is still the one nobody has correctly valued yet. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. And if this one meant something to you, share it with exactly one person who needs to hear it. Not for the channel, for them. I'll see you in the next one.